hundreds of thousands of people are fleeing their homes and crossing borders to escape the violence. The UN believes the number of people displaced could hit the millions, and officials warn we could be looking at the world's next refugee crisis, putting even more pressure on neighboring nations to accept and support those seeking refuge. For more on this, we bring in Mustafa Koch, sociology professor at Ryerson University, and Svetlana, a Toronto woman who has parents in Kiev. Thanks to both of you. Professor Koch, let's start with talking about that is what's happening on the ground in Ukraine today. We're hearing about reports of these massive traffic jams, fully booked trains. Talk about the flow of migrants there. Where are people going and how are they getting away from all this?
Well, wars are horrible. They disrupt people's lives, and tens of thousands of people have been on the move, and an estimated 368, according to the UNHCR estimations, 368,000 people already left Poland, and they expect this number can reach up to 4.5 million if the war spreads in other parts of Ukraine. So it is really disruptive. Several people are moving within Ukraine, but several others are in the borders of European Union. So it's quite a tragedy.
And there are some people who can't move at all. Svetlana, your parents are in Kiev. We talked on the phone earlier today. You said they're sort of stuck where they are. They seem to have missed this window of opportunity to leave. Walk us through the conversations that you're having with them and how they came to this decision to stay.
Well, I just want to quickly mention that my sister successfully was able to leave Ukraine through Moldova on Friday morning. She's finally in Berlin with my cousins. My parents, though, they're in Kiev, and at this point they've agreed to stay. They are not leaving. My father, at the earliest opportunity, he will join the front. My mother, she decided that she will stay with my father. Although even if they wanted to, unfortunately, the situation in the capital, it makes it extremely impossible. It's just dangerous to leave residential buildings and go outside. And I can't even mention having to drive through the city and try to leave. Also, bridges are blocked between the right and left river banks, so communications are quite limited between two huge sections of the city.
And the situation seems to be intensifying by the day. Professor Koch, Canada announcing today lethal aid. Are you concerned at all that this may provoke Russia in any way?
Well, I mean, we have to be very careful. Past examples show that playing with fire, and especially pouring gasoline over fire, is not a good idea. And this crisis emerged because of the failure of international diplomacy, and we really need to do whatever possible to reestablish that diplomatic route, to keep that route open, and rather than escalating it, we have to find ways to reduce tensions and help everybody in this situation.
Svetlana, are you having conversations about what may be next for your parents? What's their plan there?
There is no opportunity to make any plans. Their plan right now is to survive. Their plan right now is to wake up during the sirens when it's dangerous and to run to the bomb shelters. Their plan is really just to wait until it's safe to go outside. It's really hard to even think about what things are developing so quickly right now by the second. We do not know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know what will wake me up at 2 a.m. today, whether it's a message about some bombing at the other end of the city, and I have to tell my parents to wake up because there's a risk that the sirens will go off again in the next 15 minutes, let's say. I mean, this is the reality that we're facing.
And you mentioned your sister was able to get out. Can you tell us a bit more about how that happened?
Yes, well, we all had a feeling that there is some risk, probably a week before Wednesday. So last week on Wednesday, she drove over to my grandmother's house. She stayed with my grandmother in Uman, which is central Ukraine, and she stayed there with her friend for a week. So she was closer to the border. She drove. It was a very last-minute decision, and as soon as a 5 a.m. decision, actually, as soon as we heard that Kiev is being invaded, we knew that, okay, then the attention is going towards Kiev. That means that any other areas around Ukraine are probably a little safer. So she had to abandon my grandmother with the dog and get into the car, and the two 20-year-olds were driving through villages to reach Vinnytsia, which is closer to the west border. And then the next day at 5 a.m. again, friends picked them up and dropped them off at the Moldova border, which they crossed by foot. In Moldova, they were picked up by other volunteers who drove them to a shelter. From that shelter, the next day, they got to the bus station to reach Poland. And then finally, just a few hours ago, I got confirmation from my cousin that they're now in Berlin.
An incredible journey, and there are people obviously who are trying to make it to safer parts of Ukraine, others who are trying to just get out of the country. So Professor Koch, talk to us about how some of the EU nations are accepting refugees and how that compares to refugees from other nations like Syria and Afghanistan.
Well, there are double standards. Poland, for example, has been accepting Ukrainians even after the 2014 crisis. There are an estimated 1 to 2 million people, we don't even know the full numbers, who are already living in Poland. And these are accepted easily. And then those people who try to claim refugee status and try to enter into Europe, they face serious challenges. Thousands of them have been drowned in the Mediterranean Sea or frozen to death in borders. Recently, we had stories of 12 refugee claimants in the Turkish-Greek border who have been thrown back by stripping them of their clothes, and they froze to death. And last year, similar things happened. Belarus used them as some kind of a human shield to force them to Poland and Lithuania to use political advantage. And these people's lives have been in limbo. If they are lucky, they end up in detention centers rather than working in the cities or getting to universities, and they are treated differently. And this difference is not just by chance. It is a systemic difference. It is based on racism. It is based on ethnic separation, segregationism, and it continues. And many people are responsible for this, especially European politicians. Newspapers, journalists are responsible for this. I mean, and there are stories of horror stories right now at the border. For example, there are about 300,000 students or foreign workers in Ukraine. These are mostly of South Asian, African, Middle Eastern, or Central Asian origin. And when they try to escape to neighboring countries, they are being denied. They are even being forcefully kicked out of trains, trying to get out of Kiev. But we cannot explain this by some bad apple security guards or border guards. But this is systemic, this denial of rights, and it has been happening. And when you read the media, like media stories. And I would like to quote some, like a Bulgarian prime minister, for example, Petko, was quoted saying, intelligent people, and he's explaining why Ukrainians are welcomed. And he's saying, these are intelligent people, educated people. Some of them are IT specialists, highly qualified, not the refugee wave we have become used to. People with obscure pasts, maybe terrorists. These are Europeans. And here's another story by a line by NBC journalist Kelly Kovila. She says, just to put it bluntly, these are not refugees from Syria. These are refugees from neighboring Ukraine. And that, frankly, is part of it. These are Christians. They are white. They are very similar to people who live in Poland. And I mean, when you read these lines, you can see the double standards. And it hurts people. And here, even here in our country, when the Premier of Ontario goes and says, we are going to immediately admit 20,000 refugee claimants, when even opposition parties are leaders are claiming that maybe the requirements should be removed, visa requirements should be removed, and we should admit these people. There are hundreds of thousands of Canadians who want to unite with their family members, and they have been told that because of the long queue, they have to wait for years to get their family members to Canada, and then we are opening our doors to some others. And this is a human tragedy, and I do not deny it is a horrible situation, and I really feel sad for Ukrainian people, but I also feel really sorry for the double standards, because it doesn't help us. It doesn't help anybody. So we really need to understand these issues. And media has a serious, big responsibility to avoid similar tragedies, to inform people.
Okay, Professor Koch, thank you very much for your time and your perspective on this. Svetlana, we are praying for your family and are hoping for a safe return. Thank you again for your time and your perspective.